Greetings, folks, and welcome to the 71st episode of the Lessons from the Cockpit show. I am your host, Mark Hasara, and for over 60 years, I have loved airplanes. Ever since I was a 5-year-old kid standing on the hood of my Grandpa Andy's car, watching 707s and DC-8s and Lockheed Constellations land at Los Angeles International Airport, I've always said to myself, why work for a living when I can do this? You ask any pilot to define what flying really means, and they will tell you long periods of boredom interrupted by short, intermittent periods of extreme terror. On the Lessons from the Cockpit show, we investigate some of the tactics, techniques, and procedures these aviators created and cultivated during these flying events. But more importantly, what did they learn from these extreme and extraordinary military, commercial, and even general aviation operations? This exploration gives our listeners practical advice on how does the aviation world work, but more importantly, expands critical thinking skills both in the air and on the ground. Many of the stories and tactics and techniques, procedures that you're going to hear today have never been told before, and you're going to hear them first on the Lessons from the Cockpit show. This episode of our show is brought to you by the book Tanker Pilot, Lessons from the Cockpit, found on Amazon in all 4 formats: hardback, softback, Kindle, and Audible. Tanker Pilot gives you a behind-the-scenes look at global air refueling operations and some really interesting insights into how air campaigns are planned and executed. Tanker Pilot is now on General Mike Minahan, the commander of Air Mobility Command's Leadership Library reading list. On today's show, we have a C-17 pilot that's going to talk to us about the OODA Loop in the cockpit, observation, orientation, decision, action loop, and give us some great stories of what it was like flying the C-17, but also being on the group that did the upgrade to the C5 Galaxy to the C5M configuration. So, grab an adult beverage of your choice, sit down, strap in, and let's begin the Lessons from the Cockpit show with Lee Hunt, C-17 pilot, now flying for United. Lee Hunt, welcome to the Lessons from the Cockpit show. Great to have you on today, man. How you doing?
Doing good. Nice to be here, Mark. Thank you.
It's great to have another airlifter on, another AMC guy on. Why don't you just quickly introduce yourself, say, hey, here's my background. You and I have already talked about some of the things that you want to discuss, and we'll just jump right into that, okay? So tell us a little bit about your background.
Yeah, sounds good. I was initially a communications officer, went down to Tyndall Air Force Base and got down there, and one of my best buddies from Auburn came down through F-15 RTU. He would go to work after I went to work, and he would be home before I was at work, and I was a support group exec at the time. He was watching my big screen TV more than I was, and I realized, well, this flying thing seems like it's paying off for you. And so I was fortunate enough, my support group commander let me take long lunch breaks and go to the Aero Club, and I got my private pilot license and got picked up out of Tyndall as the lone guy to go to pilot training. So a little bit behind on the 20-year career, but other than that, 17 years on the C-17. Flew it throughout from pilot training on through McCord, Dover, and I had a small stint in Defense Contract Management Agency, and then back to McCord before retiring in 2019. Now on with United Airlines on the 737, and did a small stint at Atlas with COVID being in the way, and flying on the 777 for 2 years. Wanted to take the opportunity to share some lessons from the cockpit. So excited to be here.
Man, it's great to have you on too. And, flying the C-17, what an incredible airplane and the things that it's done. You mentioned that you did one of the very first combat offloads. Why don't you talk to us a little bit about, first of all, tell us what it's like flying the C-17, and then explain to our listeners, hey, this is how we offload cargo to troops in the field. We either do it by parachute or we'll actually land and drop it off. Want to talk to us a little bit about that?
Yeah, certainly. The C-17 is such a beauty of an airplane. The agility that it possesses, how smoothly it flies, and yet if you want it to be a toaster oven and fall out of the sky, it'll do the same thing. And so it's a testament to McDonnell Douglas and then Boeing taking it over and putting that piece of strategic and tactical airlift together to provide fly. Just a highly capable airlift machine, and it was amazing to fly. I miss it every day, and at the same time, I look forward to the future. But it was definitely fun to fly. But from that, I think that there are a few things of what we see in aviation of that relationship between man, machine, and nature, and what you're thrust into. I think that was kind of the beauty of the C-17, of the crewed airplane, and the relationships that you build on the crew, and as you develop young pilots, but at the same time young loadmasters, and as you see that they progress, or they're older than you as you're a young pilot on the back. So normally as a C-17, you would go around as a 3-pilot, 2 loadmaster crew for the augmented days, for the longer days. You would typically land for an airland mission. You'd land, and the aerial porters would come up with some sort of K-load or potentially some forklifts, and take it off the ramp, and distribute it as needed. And I'd say the testament to the Air Force training model is we took young kids. We made a lot of things happen around the world, with what you now see as minimal hours, minimal experience, but yet just routine, and tutelage from their elders in the cadre in it that helped execute these missions. I was never an airdropper, but obviously you could also airdrop cargo out the back as a means of delivery as well. But one of the rarest forms of delivery was a combat offload, where you would open the door and ramp in the back, release the locks on the cargo floor, and just kind of drive out from underneath it. The cargo would fall 9-10 feet from the ramp down onto the runway or to the airfield ramp, and you would move on. However, that being said, the combat offload, just because of the sheer nature of dropping something 9 feet, it's very rare that you're going to have an opportunity to employ that method of delivery, and so it rarely was implemented. I would say, as luck typically has it in aviation, sometimes you're blessed with an opportunity, or sometimes you're thrust into an opportunity to excel.
Isn't that the truth, man?
Whether you wanted it or not. Yeah. and so during our deployment in 2009, I was with the 3rd Airlift Squadron at the time, and we were down at IUD Air Base. The airfield Tarin Kowt there in Afghanistan was still a dirt strip, but they were in the means of trying to expanding the airfield and reinforcing, strengthening their ramp, kind of hardening some structures there. And so they had put on 4 steel boxes, and inside each of those steel boxes was steel runway matting that was rolled over inside the boxes. However, those 4 boxes were so long that they didn't fit on just one pallet. They had them on 2 pallet trains. Mm-hmm. And so on the 2 pallet trains, the way they were loaded in the cargo compartment down the center, you could fit 5 of them easily there in the back. However, a forklift's not going to get them off because the 2 pallet trains are just loosely kind of chained together. So the forklift would kind of scissor them, I guess, if you will, and it just couldn't support it. Where I guess the interpersonal piece of some of my lessons just kind of started was one of the Sage Loadmasters that I had flown with for well over a year at that point had that spidey senses of experience and the knowledge of talking to those other Loadmasters that had been through, that said, I don't think they have the handling equipment. I think they just have forklifts. I don't think they have it. And so we reached out to TACC and we said, are you sure that they've got a K-load, or they have the right MHE to take this stuff off? And they go, you're good to go. So we left IUD for Kandahar to go get gas, because from there we were going to have gas, go from Kandahar, a very quick flight over to Tarin Kowt, about 60 miles, back over to Kandahar to get gas to go back to the deed. In flight, Josh again was like, I don't think they got it, boss. It's not there. And this is where, that experience and trust that you have with other people, when you know where they're coming from, you know their knowledge base, and you have that inherent trust. There was times, it was at that time that the need to be persistent for the right answer kind of emerged. So we landed again at Kandahar. We called TACC. They said, you guys are good. As we got fueled, it still didn't feel right. Called them back 3rd time. So, are you sure? They go, we'll get them on the horn. They called. They're like, you're good to go. Still, there was a lack of trust. And I guess that's kind of inherent in today's aviation with our VVM model of trust but verify, which really means I don't trust you. the verification was there of like, I don't think they have it. And so what was already a complex situation on where landing at Tarancal, a dirt strip, was only one landing a day. You landed in one direction. There was a keyhole at the end of the runway that you would turn around, you would exit, download, turn around, and you would take off opposite direction. There was no backing up. C-17, we can back up with reverse thrust, but because of the reverse thrust, it added more weight-bearing capacity than the runway could allow, so you would dig in. So there was no backing up and repositioning yourself other than what was available from landing in one direction.
That's interesting, Lee. I'd never heard that.
So on that field, it wasn't stressed enough, so we couldn't back up. So you had one shot. Yeah, that was it. On top of that, though, the runway was 4,500 feet long. In order to do a combat offload, you typically needed a minimum of 1,500 feet. So in order to pull off our plan to allow the opportunity to happen, we needed to make that landing happen in 3,000 feet to give us the 1,500 feet left to even attempt the combat offload. What was already a complex mission on landing on the dirt in the first place, because you've got the brownout effect as you land, the dirt rushing forward, that you can't see anything, and it's just blind faith that you're stopping ahead where you want to. All of those things are kind of piling in, but now we're adding on a greater demand than what was originally signaled in the mission set. I made the landing there at Tarancal. We stopped pretty much right at 3,000 feet, and we called the airfield supervisors over, airfield ops guys, and the aerial porters, and said, what do you have? And they go, oh, we only have forklifts. And we're like, that's what we figured. We spent about 2.5 hours on the phone with our ROI system, calling back to TACC. They woke up General Scott. He came in and approved the combat offload. There was a combat offload that occurred a few years back, but it was never authorized. And they ended up breaking multiple things on the pallets, mostly glass, computers, medical equipment, or whatever it was. The stories were abound of the crew that broke all the things in the one combat offload that was occurred. No one wanted to touch it with a 10-foot pole and even suggest you were going to try it, because it was already not necessarily a laughing stock, but it was definitely a point of contention of, we practice these things all the time, but we're never going to do it. And here you are now in a situation where you're going to use the one thing that you didn't think you'd ever use. And really, again, all because of the testament of the Loadmaster being persistent enough to say, I don't think they're right. I think that we need to prepare for this. And so they gave the approval about 2.5 hours after we landed. And then this is where I thought, I was like, if we're going to do this, brought my camera with me, and we had Loadmaster had his camera inside. He filmed the combat offload from inside the airplane. I had the Ravens, the security forces team that went with us. I sent them outside with my camera, and they filmed it from the outside. Executed the combat offload flawlessly. We pulled off at the end in the keyhole. The guys came out, they broke down the chains, and they forklifted off the boxes individually, peeled off the runway, patted it down, re-stressed it, if you will, and we took off and left. And in the flight back home, I had spliced the videos together so that the internal camera and the exterior camera were linked up, so that you saw them together. And I had a buddy up at TACC. He gave me a link to one of their servers, and I uploaded the video. So a few hours after it was accomplished, General Scott was able to see what he approved. He auto-approved the next 4 combat offload missions for that steel runway matting in subsequent days. The 5th one, they put combat camera and filmed it, and it was on AFN for a small clip of some of the squadron mates that did it. But again, to the point of, it was a reliance of crew members knowing, when to be persistent and when to trust, and at the same time not trust the guidance that they were being given, and not to be too geeked out on Air Force stuff. But it reminded me, and kind of all of the things of talking with you today, of, I've always been fond of the OODA Loop concept and John Boyd OODA Loop. And we've always kind of looked at it from a strategy or an operations standpoint. You can apply it even to an airplane cross-check, but you rarely apply it to interpersonal relationships of people provide you information about themselves, about their background, about their experience, and how you orient that information or you discard it, how you decide with it or without it, and how you act. We have so many of these tiny sets of OODA loops that just happen in milliseconds that we don't even recognize, what we do and how we align. And I feel it happens far more often in a crew concept, because you're trying to decipher multiple pieces of personal information and experiences And then as that aircraft commander, making the right decision or a decision based off of what you've gathered. And like, again, I think that was one of those where you were trying to make a decision fast enough to information that kept being counter to the truth. It was verified. No, they have it. They've got the K loader. They've got the download equipment. And you have to still kind of go in the face of it and say, no, I've got trust here in this information instead of what should have been the superior information. And I think that some of that decision making, some of those OODA loops have kind of transcended through a lot of the other aviation stories and lessons that I've learned.
Lee, that's incredible information. I never thought of that. And you're absolutely right, man. The OODA loop: observation, orientation, decision, and action. And you and I have both studied that over and over and over again because of when you and I were in the Air Force. That was a big deal.
Right.
What you're talking about is you need to write a paper on this. You really do. You need to write something about this, article around this.
And so
because this is a great concept for every pilot, not just C-17 guys, but people that are riding around in 172s. Same thing.
Right. Same thing. No, and I, as I was trying to think through, just interpersonal relationships and human factors kind of things. One thing that I've always joked about, and I've been fortunate enough with the C-17, the 777, and now the 737 being Boeing products. There's one thing, and a lot of people may know it, may never even thought about it. If you press a line select key on a Boeing product that doesn't have a line selectable item to press, on certain pages, a message comes up on the scratch pad that says button push ignored. And it's always cracked me up because you didn't ignore it. You acknowledged that I pressed something I shouldn't have pressed. And you're calling me out as an idiot if you're doing anything, but you didn't ignore it. I think that when we have our small little conversations in the cockpit, those meet and greets, all of those things, nothing's ever truly ignored by the other pilot. So what you divulge to them gets tucked away in their OODA loop of what do you know, or what do I assume that you know, which can definitely have differing effects. It can build confidence. It can build complacency. It can build numerous things. I feel in some aspects, I got my seaplane rating just before I retired up in Seattle. I had wanted to do it when I was up there. My first assignment, 04 to 08, I was living in downtown Seattle. I saw the seaplanes land on Lake Union. I was like, that looks great. I want to do that. And I never capitalized on it. And I was like, you know what? I want to do it before I retire. We're here before I move away. And I was like, I know I may never use it, but it looks so fun. And I want to knock it. I want to knock it out. The C-17 flies backside. You flare with power. You freeze the attitude on the stick. You set a 8-degree delta between your nose high and the approach path that you want. You want a 3-degree glide path, you set 5 degrees nose high, gives you the 8-degree delta. You come down at 50 feet, you flare with power. With a seaplane, very similar. You flare with power. I feel almost to some extent of my quick understanding and the fact that I had done that for 17 years with my instructor pilot had almost kind of given him a sense of, I am well versed in how a seaplane flies. I'm ready to go. And what I divulged in either trying to say who I was or not look like an idiot myself or whatever it was in those conversations, I think potentially had a lasting effect on a situation later in the 6 flights. In the second flight that we had, he demoed a crosswind takeoff on Lake Washington. He demoed the airplane. We're in a Piper Super Cub, so he's sitting behind me. He has no instrumentations back there. And the Super Cub was pretty juiced. It wasn't the 150 horsepower. Normally it was 180. It had the Vortex generator kit on it. So even with that, the small little sheets of paper that they had for me to study the Super Cub, it said 53 knots with a stall speed. Every time I saw 53 knots in that fat needle, I was nowhere near it. I was well and above stall speed, and he kept saying too fast, too fast. And I'm like, you can't see it back there. Like, you can't see the needle. I'm seeing it right here. It's 53 knots. And he's like, no, you're too fast. I can hear it. He had this level of familiarity with the airplane by sound, because he had to in the back, and I didn't. And in fact, another instructor it took to finally take me up, and we stalled the airplane just to understand where the stall speed was, and it wasn't at 53 because of the VG kit. It was somewhere below 40 where the needle was dead. When I flew with this crosswind takeoff demo with him behind me, all of a sudden we did 2 360s over the lake at about 1,000 feet, 60 degrees bank turn, and he said in the back, well, this is good for me. And I said, yeah, this is good for me too. He thought I was flying. He let go of the stick. He never pumped a pass. He never said, you have the aircraft. And I think back, like I said, to some extent, there's a lot of just general airmanship that should have transpired otherwise. But I wondered how much complacency was put in the intro of button push ignored that really wasn't ignored. All my past, all the other things of, what I do, what I don't do, my level of confidence, either in the flying or in myself, as that translates to someone else that you're flying with in their OODA loop. What did they orient to and decide about me? And then, like I said, I think this was still a gaffe and an airmanship. And yet I had never flown an airplane with a pilot behind me. T-37, T-1, C-17, all side by side. You knew who was flying because you could see their hands. So this was definitely new to me. But from my takeaway was, there was a little bit of that of what I give off in those verbal discussions from who I am, what I can do. And then at the same time, also just kind of understanding that, there's some complacency too on my part of when you get comfortable flying with the expert, the instructor, thinking that they know everything and they don't. Not all the time. Sometimes people have bad days, or sometimes people just don't know what they're supposed to know. But being ready, never assuming the situation. And it's those experiences along the way that when you get the spidey senses and when you go, this doesn't feel right, you should also be ready to take over when it's not right. I think we've all flown with guys that are in more senior positions that you either came in thinking, oh, this is the senior guy, in my OODA loop of even not even talking with them. There's a senior guy. They know more than I do. And then just being ready to reorient, redecide and act on salvaging a bad situation and walking away from it. And that one clearly on just hanging over a lake at 1,000 feet at 60-degree bank will change your life a little bit too. But that one kind of stuck with me as well on what I gave off from myself and then what I assumed as well from him in those little small micro decisions.
We used to say in the KC-135, there's no more dangerous crew than a crew of instructors. An instructor pilots, instructor
Right.
navigator, instructor boom operator. I thought you did it. No, I thought you did it. Didn't you do it? No, I didn't do it. Did you do it? No. The most dangerous thing in an KC-135 is when you had a full instructor crew because, like you said, you get complacent. Oh, well, he's got my back,
Right.
and
Right.
there's been a number of times where that came to bite us, in the 135. I got a story about that. I'll tell some other time.
Yeah. No, so, that is totally a running joke of, those that can't fly, instruct, those that can instruct, evaluate, and those that can evaluate, write policy.
Isn't that the truth? Doesn't that describe the Air Force?
Yeah,
it really does.
It does. It does. That was at the tail end of my Air Force career, and as it kind of caused reflection. If you could look at it, you go, yeah, the relationships that you have, how you converse in the crew resource management, the experience, the aptitude that you show has a lasting effect in that crew dynamic with how quickly you are assessing your flying partners. What do they know? How do I take it? How do I move on? And I saw that in an evaluation of a young aircraft commander to be that, and it's always great as the evaluator, you get to sit back and you get to watch all of it, and you decide when you speak up or when you don't speak up, but you get to see it all play out. You get to see the thought process. You see the hamster on the wheel, either moving or dead, and you get to see it. The interesting piece of this malfunction wasn't prevalent in the C-17. It was rare, and it took me a minute or two to kind of figure out what it exactly was. But we were coming across the Atlantic Ocean back home. The magenta line on the screen just disappeared, and that was literally the only indication the entire crew had of anything. The autopilot stayed engaged. The FMAs were locked in around the mission line. Nothing would tell you that anything had gone wrong. There was a small message in a scratch pad, nothing that would have indicated what exactly happened and why it happened. Airplane's still flying, no bells, whistles going off, just autopilot's locked in. The first pilot, the senior co-pilot, actually, after a while, had determined ballpark what was causing it. The flight management computer had, in essence, frozen. I mean, it was like being in the simulator on position freeze. It was stopped. It thought it was frozen in space over the Atlantic Ocean. We were obviously still flying. The magenta line was gone, but it was still on top of the last second of that magenta line before it disappeared. So it just held its position on position freeze in the jet's mind. As we continued to move, the gas is burning down. It thinks, I'm way back there. I now don't have enough gas to make it to Dover. I don't have enough gas to make it to here. The gas is continually ticking down, and it's reevaluating its own livelihood. It's still making decisions off of being frozen in space. The aircraft commander thinks we're fine. Things just continue. But continue of like, well, I'm going to have to divert. Basically, the whole flight box was locked out. There wasn't loading an approach. There wasn't doing anything because it wasn't working. The box had seized. The co-pilot, like I said, had got him in the ballpark of what the right answer was and how to fix it. Necessarily didn't have the exact verbiage on what it was, but had him in the right spot of the checklist for FMC anomalies and this, in essence, flight plan lockout that was occurring. The aircraft commander to be kind of still took in the information, but disregarded it, moved on. There was another baby co-pilot that was on board that had GPS on his iPad and was almost kind of had this false confidence that he was providing the aircraft commander. We knew where we were. I'm like, yeah, but you don't, because you don't know where you are on the filed flight plan. That line is gone. You were flying in space moving forward, but you were drifting off of it. And I could tell from the heading and where we were drifting, I was going to give him right until the next longitude before the turn that we needed to make if he could identify and remedy the problem. But at that point, he was getting into, I'm going to go to here and make decisions that would have complicated his life for sure, because I don't know how he would have flown an approach other than hand fly an approach, but how he would have gotten to an airfield minus basically a verbal PAR from the controller to guide him into the field. But it was interesting that the aircraft commander to be thought that he needed to be, not necessarily be right, but have command versus taking input from the entire crew. And that, I think, has resonated across a lot of our careers of sometimes we are not the best pilot on the airplane. Sometimes we are not the smartest pilot on the airplane. But to be the best aircraft commander you can be on the airplane is to figure out from the information that you have from all of your crew members, what's the right answer to move ahead. And you may not have had it, but if you can decide on the right one on who had it and move forward, you can live to fly the next day. And so eventually I had to step in and intervene and say this was the problem, because he had just kind of shut down the other first pilot. And that was definitely a crew resource that he had that he cut off the interaction. And not necessarily that he was harsh or rude, but it's still just dismissive in nature. And it was in his lack of experience or shortened experience. And I don't know if you've ever heard the term, Mark, a lot of times we talk about situational awareness. If you don't have situational awareness, instead of having SA, you have less A.
Yeah.
And in this regard, he had some less A on exactly what was going wrong and why it was going wrong. And so the intervention happened, but it was more just the takeaway of like, hey, we're going to come across mishaps and malfunctions that we're mentally, not prepared for. We can try. We can go in the sim, we can practice, we can rehearse, we can do as many things as we want to. But at some point, you have to rely on what you have. Sometimes that's yourself. Sometimes that's other people. The Sully Sullenberger, landing on the Hudson, nobody practices that. That was just what he had to deal with and what he had in his own OODA loops for that day. But that's kind of what we have across aviation in general is making those quick decisions, not only on what the airplane's trying to do to us, but at the same time, what we have is relevant information and how to digest it. And in that case, I think it was a good learning lesson for moving forward, because there was definitely more regard for insight from other pilots. You don't have to know everything. A lot of times you just need to know where to get the information and then how to move forward with the information once you've got it. And so that one also definitely kind of stuck out with me for just even advocacy as the first pilot of knowing when to continue. Knowing when to continue to advocate, to say, no, boss, this is the right answer.
Rick Tellini, MiG killer from Desert Storm, has a great term for it. He calls it intuitive expertise. And you and I have been in numerous situations where our book knowledge, sim knowledge doesn't cover what's happening to you, but you know that there are a few things that you need to do
right
in order to keep not only flying the airplane, Lee, but keep everybody alive. And I had one of these situations in Hawaii.
Sure.
we had a bleed duct failure under the floor of the KC-135, and it was blowing 1300 degree air on the wood floor and started it on fire. But that wasn't the bad part. It was blowing that hot air on the top of the forward body fuel tank and the elevator cables that were running down both sides. And when the crew chief ran up and said, "Turn around, Captain Hasara, now I know what's wrong with the airplane, turn around. And he was frightened for his life. And I looked back and saw 3 crew chiefs, one putting on the firefighter's mask, pulling the pin out of an extinguisher, and 2 wrenching up the floor. And when they got the plywood panel up, flames went everywhere. Just immediately knew, slow to 255 knots because that's the best airframe speed on the airplane, and descend from 16,000 feet down to 9,000 feet so that we can all breathe. Here's one of the fascinating things, Lee, about this instance. And you talk about OODA Loop. We really do fly with our 5 senses. And people always says, well, taste and smell, really? I go, oh, yeah. And all of us were on oxygen and couldn't smell the fire. As soon as we took our oxygen masks off, we could smell it was like flying with a wood burning stove in the back of the airplane. And it got really hot back there. Oh, really hot. Okay. There was 2 holes in the bleed duct on both sides, about 4 to 6 inches long. And the crazy thing, Lee, was we'd push the throttles up, the airplane would depressurize. We'd pull the throttles back, and it would repressurize. There's nothing in any books of any airplane that I've ever heard that deals with this situation.
Interesting.
What would happen is when we push the throttles up and more thrust was going through the bleed duct, because it's the bleed duct right before it gets to the air cycle machine to cool it all off. So all that hot air is expanding. It is expanding the metal, and that's when it was getting hot. And as soon as we pulled the engines back and leveled off and everything, the thing would close down.
Interesting.
Isn't that crazy, Lee?
Yeah. But, like you said, the speed in which you have to make that discovery it's fascinating.
It really is. And again, you talked about OODA Loop, and here we are really dealing with not a lot of information from our training, but knowing we've got to go back to Honolulu. I've got to get everybody down to 9,000 feet so that we can take our oxygen masks off and fight this thing in the back, fight this fire in the back. They actually got the piece of plywood up. It singed a bunch of the forearm hairs on the 2 crew chiefs. And they actually got it up against something, and then we're spraying it down with fire extinguishers. And when we landed, the paint on the other side had all flowed down to the bottom because it had burned it about 2 dimes width through about 8 inches in the center of it, like this, about like this. It was about a dimes to 2 dimes width, and that was causing the paint to bubble on the floor. But here's the interesting thing about that crew chief, Lee. That crew chief had the same problem 7 years before. When he saw the paint bubbling, he knew exactly what was wrong.
Wow. Like we were talking, the experience of just, sometimes you're blessed with the right experience. Sometimes, you are lucked into it, and then to trust and know that he knows what's going on. You've got to give some of that up, from your seat up front. You've got to say, you got this, go take care of it.
And, here I am, a college educated guy, and he was a senior master sergeant, this guy. Okay. Again, like you said, he has all of this experience. Okay. And that's part of what the observation, orientation, decision, action loop is experience and the knowledge of, I've been through this before. Right. And he said, as soon as I walked by and saw the paint bubbling on the floor, I knew exactly what was wrong, and had the guy start wrenching up the floors, putting the firefighter's mask and everything on. Okay. We got the airplane back. We're 210 miles west going back to Okinawa. And you know what? And like you talk about in the OODA Loop, sometimes you make the wrong decision, because I kept going west. Mm-hmm. Motivation was to find out what is wrong with the airplane going away from the place that I'm supposed to land it. I was passing up the place that I should have just gotten it on the ground. Okay. Because we would have found it going back home sooner or later too. We stayed below 16,000 feet because, remember, above 18,000 feet, if you have a physiological incident, you have to go through the altitude chamber and everything all over again, But I kept going west. Right. That was the mistake that I made. I have never heard of the magenta line disappearing. Yeah. So what was the problem?
What was the problem? I mean, it took me a second. The mission computer had frozen. It's in essence had faulted itself, but yet didn't trip the other mission computer from kicking off the autopilot. It was almost like in the comparator between the two, there wasn't enough of fault to drag it on. And it was a fairly new entry in the checklist that Boeing had put in about FMC anomalies, I assume to cover these random occurrences that we did not have in the early checklist that talked about flight plan lockout. And this thing was buried in the dash 2. When you got there, it wasn't even in the actual dash 1 of non-normals. It was buried back in telling you what the flight computer mission and the scratch pad messages meant. And so if you didn't take that small blurb that was at the bottom of the scratch pad and go run it to ground, you would have never figured out that that's what it was. There was no linkage between the checklist that had the problem and how to fix it and what came up in this particular instance that got us there. The checklist had covered a few other instances, but it didn't cover the scratch pad message. It's obviously rare for it to occur, but it seems that it's one of those things of, Murphy's Law or whatever else of if it, whatever can happen, it's going to happen and pick the worst time to happen. And yet this was just a random anomaly that it took me a few minutes, but I was under the understanding of following the scratch pad messages, and I knew where to follow that for mission computer. It was poor design in the checklist of knowing how to resolve it faster. So I don't discredit the aircraft commander of knowing, hey, I should have solved this quickly. It was more of just the advocacy portion and that relationship of having the correct information and disregarding it moving forward. But it was buried. It was one of those things I'm sure that they didn't think was going to occur at a likelihood to put the linkage there into the non-normal. But yeah, interesting to say the least. But I think I think that's what more times connects us when we get into these unique scenarios of opportunity to excel or showcase airmanship. When you think outside the box or you connect those pieces and that don't link. There was a small field north of Baghdad, Taji Airfield. It was about 4,500 feet, almost like the Tarankout field. It may have been slightly longer, but it was a broken up part of the runway. And so they had put a NVG powered box for the landing zone with a rotating beacon at the end to mark the end of the usable runway. And we were going into that field to take prisoners from Basra back into Baghdad, but not Baghdad International. They wanted to use the small field in periods of darkness so that they didn't see that we were moving prisoners in the middle of the night. But you would leave the deed, you would go up to Basra, you'd pick up about 100 prisoners. The cops would strap them with cargo straps to the cargo floor over top the tarp, because obviously they're not getting up for bathroom breaks. And then the cops would strap themselves back on the ramp with their shotguns and watch them over. They would fly up with us to Taji. We'd drop them off. We'd go back to Basra with the cops, pick up another round of prisoners, go back to Taji a second time, and then go back to Basra, drop off the cops, and then go back to the deed. Well, the second run at Taji is you're waiting for solar-powered NVG lights to continue to work. And while there's enough sun during the day in Iraq, nature will have it that it's a waning effort at the end, that the lights are just dimmer than they were the first time. And going into the field, if you've never been, you had to go with a crew and do kind of an over shoulder with that other crew. And you saw what they saw on how to get to the airfield. Even if you had the magenta line that said, there's the runway, you probably weren't going to get it because the cultural lighting around the field, you've got NVGs on, everything is so blinded and washed out that you probably weren't going to pick it up. The reliance again on, we have this technological masterpiece in the C-17, and yet you still needed a dude on the airplane to go, all right, you see that? Look for the brake and the fence right here. There's lights across all this fence across the top. And all of a sudden, for no reason other than it's just happenstance, there's lights that don't work in this section of the fence. If you come off the right-hand side of the last light, there's the box. Looks slightly up. You needed a person to tell you that. You did these buddy rides to go in there, and you'd land on, like I said, on the very short runway and drop them off and leave. One of I think, just intelligent adjustments on the fly that one of the pilots had gone up to the field. And it is after a few of us in the squadron, we had taken over from the 16th Airlift Squadron. They had shown us the observation rides to the first few of us, went in there, and then we kind of flew with our own for the others that hadn't been in there yet. This pilot was a previous fate for pilot training. So what was new to me is just, all pilots have different experiences and different things they've shoved in their tool bag and kit on what they have at their disposal or thought process. He shot the approach in there and he never saw it. Even though he'd seen it before, he'd landed there before, didn't see it. Went around, didn't see it a second time, went around again. He asked the tower to pull out the spotlight from the tower and shine it down onto the zone on that box. and it blew up the light with the NVGs on. And he was blinded, of like, oh, there it is. I can see it now. Because you're looking for 4 little lights that don't look like headlights, don't look like a house, don't look like the fence, don't look like any of those things. It was just something that he was like, I've only got, a few more opportunities to do this with the gas I've got. And the fact that I'm just a big noise machine circling around Baghdad. I'm kind of losing all element of surprise here. And, and I've got 100 prisoners in the back,
that I don't want to take back to Basra.
Right, that I don't want to take back to Basra. But he told that story when he came back, and that also has always kind of had an impression on me of, sometimes that's what we get, quote unquote, paid to do. Is we've got checklists, we have things to guide us, and it's what you're doing here with the lessons from the cockpit, where you're able to pass on the hangar talk and everything else that said you did something that isn't in any checklist. You pulled out a technique of something that's not in the top 10 of things that most pilots would say, hey, did you ask the tower to put the spotlight on the zone? And he brought that out.
Absolutely.
And, it just always made me think there's probably something that I'm not thinking about, that I'm missing, that could still be a resource, that could still be helpful. Now, do I want to use it? Or do I know to use it? And those are kind of some of those things of just, I think in general, that we as pilots often have, that thirst for knowledge of, we want to know the jet in and out. We want to know the things. We want to stay on top of it, because it's just that much quicker of an OODA loop that we have when we have more things at our disposal to make a quick decision. And I spill that story into another one. And I'd say it's certainly a more roundabout lesson through a very funny example differently. But I had the opportunity to go out to Long Beach and do acceptance flights of the C-17. We were holding short for runway 30 at Long Beach. And typically for the acceptance flights, about a 4.5, 5 hour flight. We're going to go deem its airworthiness, and then we're going to go take it through its paces for shutting the engines down, doing a tactical descent with the thrust reversers deployed in flight. We're going to check the jip whiz over at Palmdale, make sure that the 2 low gear sounds appropriately. We're going to run it through all the things. We're going to time how long it takes the gear to get down. We run it through everything. So you're not necessarily in a rush because you know how long the flight's going to be. So we're holding short, and Long Beach Tower says, Globemaster 1, SoCal approach says it's going to be about another 5-10 minute delay. We're like, okay, yeah, whatever, no problem. Then about 30 seconds or so goes by, and this little guy comes on the radio. It's like, Long Beach Tower, it's November 777. I'm west of the LA River, just looking to land Long Beach. Tower goes, November 777, you can remain west of the LA River. You can go back to SoCal approach. And he's like, oh, okay, remain west of the LA River, back to SoCal. And he's all just kind of, nonchalant about everything. And, we're still holding short, waiting. About 4 more minutes or so goes by. Guy chimes back on the radio. Long Beach Tower, November 777. And they're like, yeah, you're cleared to land on 8 left. He's like, all right, cleared to land 8 left. About 30 seconds goes by, and he goes, are these F-16s out here all the time? He was escorted by 2 ship F-16s to land at Long Beach, 8 left. As soon as he landed, we took off. We did our whole sortie. We came back only to find out that he was met by 2 F-16s, because when President Obama was out there in Los Angeles for some convention, some speaking engagement, something that he was out there for, this guy decided to fly his Cessna 172 right through the Marine One formation, split the helicopters, went right through them. He was also subsequently arrested for hauling about 100 kilos of Colombian Bam Bam on the Cessna 172. Obviously, the largest takeaway is if you're going to be a pilot, much less a drug dealer, you might want to read the NOTAMs and the TFRs. But it always stuck with me of the confidence that he had. he in his brain was probably on the top of his world. He's living his best life in his little bubble. Yet there's always something that you don't know, or there's someone that knows something that you don't. And that information can typically be readily available, whether you choose to find it or not, or know to find it. And it just always cracked me up of how nonchalant he was about it. But yet that thirst for knowledge wasn't there. There's something else that you can find. There's something else that's out there that can help you out to help you, hopefully not make the mistake. And that has always kind of sat with me too, of like, I'm going to be humble here and probably admit I don't know. There's something I don't know. And I may or may not know what I don't know right now, but I'm going to try and figure out what it is. And hopefully the other pilot knows what it is, or maybe I need to figure it out, in my iPad in the JEP somewhere, because I don't want to be that guy.
That boy's in a heap of trouble.
Yeah.
Flying between the helicopters. What goes through your mind? Think about OODA Loop. What goes through your mind when you think to yourself, I'm going to knife edge through the two helos that are carrying the president?
Yeah. Bold move, Cotton. I just don't get
it. What are these F-16s doing on my wing? Why would they be here?
They out here all the time? Yeah. You just flew through two helicopters that are going to be clearly painted appropriately to who they're carrying.
Yeah. And then United States of America all across the back of them.
And then, these F-16s, where are they out here all the time? It always cracked me up. It just, the world that he lived on his own island, because it wasn't me, to be that removed from reality on where you were on an airplane. It cracked me up for sure.
And you know what, Lee? I know somebody, a very dear friend of mine, that flies with the Fresno Guard, that unit of F-16s that's stationed down there at March. Okay. He's one of those guys that would, we just had a guy buzz the helicopters. You guys need to launch. Imagine what's going through these Viper pilots' minds thinking, wait a minute, what did he just do? He went between the helos, right? And they're like going, I'd be in the cockpit going, I want to see this guy. Okay. You're ballsy. You're stupid, but you're ballsy.
You're ballsy. Yeah. And, and we're, I think it was 10, 11 years removed from September 11th. So, as the fighter guys, also your own personal OODA loop of you're trying to respond to like, what is this? And to have the wherewithal of like, okay, this is just an idiot. This wasn't a malicious intent. This is just a doofus. But to know that, because you've got a short amount of time in an airplane that's going to get you there in a quick in a quick second to make some quick decisions as well. And now that whole scenario, just again, what's going through the helicopter pilots' minds as well as they're trying to maneuver from a guy that just split them.
Oh yeah.
And then the fighter guys scrambling out there when you're just thinking, I got nothing to do today, and all of a sudden the call comes up, get up there.
Yeah. Go intercept this dude that just flew in front of the president's helicopter. Go find out what he's up to. That's crazy. That's crazy. We were talking earlier. Talk to us about being at DCMA, and you were involved with this massive upgrade of the C5. The C5M, it was like new engines, new cockpit, a really nice one too. I mean, all glass and everything. Just really quickly, I will tell you something, Lee. I saw C5A number 1 fly when I was a kid living in Atlanta in the late 60s. I remember watching with the big gold test boom off the nose, because the Marietta plant was just north of us. I lived in Dunwoody, and you know where Dunwoody is.
I've been to the plant.
Yeah.
I live in Roswell, Georgia. So
so you know exactly what I'm talking about. I remember seeing the very first C5, the white and gray scheme on it and everything, flying over my house, the whine of the engines and everything. And that too is an amazing airplane. And now it's got all of these new products on it, engines, avionics and everything. Talk to us about that process of being at DCMA, the contracting, and then being involved in that kind of an upgrade to really a major airplane in the Air Force community and the Air Force's fleet.
Yes, it was a fascinating time. I went to Dover in the summer of 2008, before Dover had received its first C-5M. And I actually got to be the MC for the ceremony and announcing the arrival of the C-5M. The airplane, and obviously all of the world records that it quickly acquired with those new engines, the time to climb, the payload capacity. It is an impressive planet that moves. And it was just, it was fascinating. And so I went in as just a C-17 Bubba across the street from the C-5M as it came in to pick up the assignment to Defense Contract Management Agency. And then what that entailed at the time, I had no idea basically the world that I was walking into. I was in a role at headquarters that I had three hats, where I was, as we just discussed, doing the acceptance flights out at Long Beach every so often. And then I was working with the Air Force Personnel Center to get pilots at contractor facilities for the Air Force to help approve contractor work as government flight representatives there on site. Sometimes those pilots did acceptance flights. Sometimes those pilots just signed off the work. But we had anywhere, depending on the level of contracts, of 40 to 50 Air Force pilots, active duty pilots that had a position somewhere. And some of those were at Marietta. And obviously being at Dover, I helped facilitate some of the C5 guys that wanted to get down there to Marietta for just a change of pace and assignments as well. But the third piece was actually inspecting the contractor facilities. And so then you got to go to the site and the plant and then meet your counterparts that you had helped get those positions through the Air Force, through the Personnel Center, and get them there. And so even some of the guys that I didn't help get assignments down there, I was able to meet by going to do the inspection. In fact, that inspection in Marietta that we went down for was that same winter that Georgia had the ice storm that came through, that Georgia Power had basically come into the hotel that our crew was staying at, and the entire parking lot was Georgia Power, because no one in Atlanta is going to drive on the word ice, much less actual ice. And so power lines were down, everything was down. But it gave us time there in the facility later on to go through and just kind of chat a little bit longer with the guys. And so I'd say I had a little bit more personal interaction with them. And then one of them was a fellow Auburn grad. And so I talked with Griff fairly often. And what was fascinating about the inner workings of that contract was the Air Force, I think, was in a hard position, because they were trying to elongate the lifetime of the C-5. The A to B was one thing, but yet the legacy problems in the C-5 that were hurting the reliability rate were lingering. And when you're 50 to 60% reliable, it makes it hard. Even though you can take twice the amount of cargo as almost anybody else, when you're only doing it half the time, it kind of evens out. And so they were looking for a win. And the project was initially pitched to Congress as about a $2 billion project. But that honestly wasn't the cost of the project. The problem was because of the legacy issues that it had. And honestly, to be like, and I'm not poking in any direction of the C-5, the C-17 and the big airplanes, I think at the end of the day are products of how long their supply lines can stay open. The C-17 was able to be reliable as long as it was, because Long Beach was still open to get new parts and get them out to the places. As soon as you start outflying your supply line, you're going to break.
Yes. And
you're going to be unreliable, and you're going to have to fabricate parts and figure it out. And that is the thorn in the C-5 side, was you'd fly to Rota and you'd get stuck because the part wasn't there in Rota. And so it always made for a fine aircraft commander to choose a nice place to break, because you're going to be broken there for a while. But the C-5M, those engines and that the avionics modernization inside, to be done at Long Beach for that price tag, that would be accurate for what it was for just those pieces. And so the Air Force said, yeah, Lockheed, come get this airplane. But the airplane wasn't flyable, or it had other legacy problems. They brought it down to Marietta, and when Lockheed did the work that was required of the AMP and the RERP projects, they were done. And the Air Force said, well, that's broken back here. We didn't do that. And Lockheed said, we didn't do that. And Air Force said, no, we want a flyable airplane. You give that back to us the right way. So Lockheed was resistant to fixing legacy problems on their dime. And so the only way that they were able to move forward within the constraints of the contract was over and above work. And so the relationship that transpired and an agreement that had to be made was an induction flight. Lockheed would come up and they would figure out what was broken before they brought it back to Marietta, so that they knew if you want it to be fixed, then we will fix it in an over and above and fix it for you, but it's not on us to fix it out of our wallet. Because before that agreement had been made, Griffin told me of a story that the Lockheed guys had flown the C-5 4 times in a row, and the yoke was just laying on the screen in front of it. Hydraulics weren't powering it to be centered. It was just laying on the MFD in front of them, and they would pull it back to where it should be and fly it. And then when they parked it, let it go, and it would fall forward. And Griff was like, I'm not flying that. That's where they were at their points of contention and how costly it was. And I believe that when it was all said and done, if you added in the over and above work, that the contract ended up closer to $8 billion. I think the Air Force was in a tough place because they knew Congress wasn't going to award $8 billion. They could get $2 billion. So as shady as it was almost like a concerted effort of, we need to at least get our foot in the door to start it, and then we can trickle out the rest of it when the requirement has already been validated. And now we go, well, we've got to fix this. We've got to finish this. But if they would have gone in and said, hey, we need $8 billion, I think it would have been shut down. But it was definitely an interesting dynamic of contract relationships and being the intermediary. Even though I'm an active duty Air Force guy, being in DCMA, they were that third piece that came in that said, okay, Lockheed, we understand what you're saying. Air Force, we understand what you're saying. But being that mediator between the induction flight and the being to say, you can get paid for that. But it was very interesting to see that other pilots were willing to fly a very incomplete, unsafe airplane at the cost of $1 to prove that they didn't break it. That fascinated me. That went against all Spidey senses that I had.
Yeah. Doing a pre-flight on a jet like that must have been very fascinating. Well, normally I wouldn't take this airplane for this reason and this reason and this reason. You and I have been there, I'm sure. Well, the crew chief says to you, well, you're going to take it, aren't you? No, there's 5 gallons of gas on coming out of the back of the jet right now. Okay. No, I'm not taking the aircraft. It was fascinating, Lee, because when I left the Air Force, I went to work for Rockwell Collins. And I really enjoyed learning that piece of the puzzle. Okay. I'd flown jets, flown the KC-135, flown in a lot of other aircraft, and now I'm on the other side of it and seeing what goes into the airplane and what's in an MFD. What are the little cards that are in the back of an MFD? And the technology for the future that they were working on too was just crazy.
Yeah.
There is an adversarial relationship. And I saw it several times, when I was at Rockwell Collins, where I was told, you aren't with them anymore. You're with us. And you're like, your job is to improve our bottom line, not save money. Okay. There was a few times where I had, shall we say, aggressive negotiations with a couple of my bosses,
Right.
Not only from the standpoint of this is kind of shady, but also from the standpoint of that dog don't hunt in combat. Okay.
Right.
That will not work.
Right.
That was the other thing that I found fascinating being on the other side too, was engineers would come up and go, oh, we've got this great idea. We're going to charge the Air Force $2 million. And I'd go, why are you doing that? What's the requirement? Okay. Because I would always tell them, I finally learned all you have to do is ask, okay, what requirement are you fulfilling here?
Right.
Or are you making one? And there was one time where they were they were actually going to put in the helicopter, the MH-60s, the ability to look at the ATO on the MFD, the air tasking order on the MFD. Okay.
Right.
While they're out on their missions at, 30 feet running around trying to find the survivor. And I told the guy, I said, why are you doing this? But see, this is where it gets back to what you're talking about, experience. He had never had anybody walk him through a combat search and rescue mission. So for about 45 minutes, being at the weapons school, the tanker weapons school, and of course, during the weapons school, they have a big rescue scenario, and walking him through that. And finally, about 45 minutes later, Lee, he was asking the right questions. I knew he was getting it. And about 4 days later, he called me, Lee, and he goes, "Thank you, thank you, thank you." And I go, "For what?" He says, "You just saved us about 1,000 hours and about $2 million of development cost." Because now I understand, Now I understand.
Right. We at Long even on at Long Beach on the C-17, I was stuck in that. I'm with Defense Contract Management Agency, but we would bring out Air Force Material Command evaluators in certain instances to also augment the flying operation for evaluation. And so they sent out AFMC evaluators to look at the flying operation, and they were going to write up Boeing for not having adequate parachutes in the airplane. Now, the contract did not outline Boeing to buy or procure parachutes. So they did not. And so as you were talking about, the adversarial of having to pay for something was definitely at play. But what cracked me up was that by the letter of the law, it was right there in the reg that they were trying to force onto Boeing that said, need to have the parachutes. And for an acceptance flight, you could have up to 11 guys on the airplane with all the extra engineers and loadmasters and bookies that were there trying to take data and take that snapshot in that 5-hour flight. You didn't have room in the survival closet for 11 parachutes in the first place. Ultimately, the Air Force that had room for 5 finally skinnied it down and only put 2 parachutes in the survival locker because of weight. They were like, we're going to get rid of the 3 parachutes for just weight savings. And the expectation or the reality of were all 5 people ever going to be able to jump out of a C-17? Because of its capabilities, you were probably just going to land if you could land. And if it were that unstable that it was unflyable, somebody's not getting out. And so I think they were able to come to that consensus later. But at the time, it still had that provision in Air Force Material Command. And the funniest thing of this whole story was the Boeing guy came to the table and said, we do most of our acceptance work, the air work, out past Santa Catalina and past the warning areas. And this is North America's largest shark migration channel. Do you want to jump out or do you want to take your chances in the raft? And that shut up that conversation from then on out. There was no more talk of parachutes.
Not just sharks either, Lee. Great white sharks. That's where those great white sharks breed out there. Not just sharks, but great white sharks. Okay. The big kahunas.
Exactly.
That's a funny story, man. Do you want to jump out to the sharks or you want to take your chances in the raft? We had the same thing in the 135.
And that's, but that's the adversarial that you had. And yet at the same time, sometimes it took context. You didn't have all the information as an evaluator. You had the letter of the law, what was on the book, but you didn't have the bigger picture of someone that's had that experience or knows the environment that says that's not going to happen. And here's why it's not going to happen.
And like I said, I was on the other side of that with Rockwell.
Just funny.
Being on the other side of that with Rockwell, when we would do a statement of work, and there were certain foreign countries and certain subcontractors that we worked with where you really had to put everything in the statement of work, or they'd come back and go, we didn't have to do it. You did. Okay. We're not liable for this,
right.
And hey, I got another question for you. What's it like being in
Certainly.
a C-7? What's it like being in a C-17? And you're pulling up behind a tanker and you're going to take on like 60, 80,000 pounds of gas? Because I was the chief of the air refueling control team for 2002, 2003, the airplanes going in and out of Afghanistan from Diego Garcia. And we actually had a air refueling track just for the C-17s that were coming out of Diego. And they were taking on like 80,000 pounds. Just talk to people about what it's like pulling up to a tanker and taking on that much gas and what you really have to think about in mission plan when you're doing that.
Yes, certainly. I will peel it back a little bit further than that to just give some background and context. I got through pilot training, late to rate guy, calm guy, a little bit older. So I was more, I think, prepared just mentally and age wise. And so I was able to excel at pilot training and graduated with one of the 3 distinguished grads in the class. Got C-17s, go to Altus and go through Altus. fly the C-17, get to McCord. It's time for me to upgrade. I go down to upgrade. You got to start picking up air refueling. Well, where we were in the pace of Afghanistan and Iraq, while we met tankers consistently, they wanted to afford the co-pilots, some exposure to the tanker before they went to Altus. I didn't get that. I saw it, but I never got to actually saw multiple missions over the Black Sea. Initially, we were flying from Germany. The aircraft commander would basically stay up that whole leg so that they could prepare for the tanker over the Black Sea. Then after the refueling was done, we would fly into Afghanistan. It was so early on in the infancy that we didn't have enough. There wasn't enough gas on site to get gas there in Afghanistan, but you needed to have the tanker gas so you could get out and have alternate. So then you downloaded. It took a few hours for the download. Then you went to either Turkmenistan or Ashgabat, got gas there, and then flew back to Germany. We had waivers up to 26 hours for the duty day to pull that off. It's a long day. And the air refueling needed to occur within the first 12 hours. So if anything that I saw early on in life was serious, it was hard work, and it was typically on a long day. Like there was a lot of physical and mental prep that was needed. But other than seeing that, I had no exposure. So I went to Altus, and on my first flight to go up against the tanker, I must have looked like I was on a Smothers Brothers yo-yo. I was all over the place. I was up, down, nothing looked right. I'm all over the throttles. I'm 255. I'm 285 on my speed. With the 135, we're supposed to be 265. So I'm all over the place with speed control. I'm pitchy. And I thought to myself, I'm like, if all that I've seen and all what those guys were doing, they made it look effortless. This was a lot of work. I was like, I guess I'm done. I guess I'll go figure out what else to do in the Air Force. Like, this isn't it. I'm not going to make it. To go back to previous points of relationships and personal things. The one thing that turned the corner between that first flight and the second flight was a different instructor. And I hope to some regard kind of is the theme with even this podcast today. If I'm redundant, that I've said it differently. I've said it in a different way, or I've used different word choices, because that second instructor used different principles, same principle, but different words to convey how to do refueling. And it was like it clicked. He said, instead of this, do this. But it was the same thing. It was just a different word choice, and it clicked. And having that piece in the instructor toolkit, of how to teach something different as well. Don't just keep saying the same thing over and over again and hope for a different result. Change yourself and how you're presenting it. Because that day, it was like AR for the rest of my life clicked. I was, at the end of the day, I felt I was really good at it. I enjoyed it. But it was definitely different when you had a training line where you could set a null setting where your power was going to be, fairly stagnant. And you just needed to keep your pitch behind the tanker because you're both just flying along burning gas. When you got to take 70,000 to 110,000 pounds of gas, everything changed, because as the tanker got lighter and you got heavier, everyone's angle of attack changed. And as our angle of attack changed and the nose our bow wave affected the tanker tail more. And we were already, from my understanding, the worst offender of bow wave on any tanker was the C-17 nose, pushed people around relatively with hostility. Because on that first flight, I remember I punched off the autopilot. I came up to the tanker on my first flight at Altus, and it kicked off the autopilot. He pitched his nose over. I pitched my nose over, peed my pants, all the things that you would expect because of the bow wave. But when you get into the situation where you're taking gas and you're getting heavier, at 110,000 pounds of gas, you're taking on gas roughly 6,700 pounds per minute. You've got a good 15 minutes or so that you need to be behind the tanker with a power setting that is moving. It's not stagnant. It has to change and adjust. And as your pitch changes, you kind of run out of power. You're almost at the stops because you're fighting an AOA that doesn't want to fly fast. It doesn't want to fly 265. And so it gets mushy. It gets really mushy on the controls and your authority, and you don't have much room to catch back up. If you fall back and fall out of the slop, you're going to probably fall off the back. And so those large fuel loads were extremely challenging. The 70,000 pounds of gas, 10 minutes on the boom. We practice, regularly 5 minutes on, 5 minutes off plugs with the tankers. 10 minutes, yeah, it's longer and, can be more fatiguing, but when you had to do it for 15 minutes, it definitely became challenging as the aircraft dynamics changed between the two. That relationship on how you meshed up and what angle the boom was in your receptacle, that was also, another instance of you're like, well, I don't want to be the guy that's a unicorn today. It was definitely challenging.
My largest offload, Lee, is 103,500 pounds to a B-52. It took us 21 minutes. 6,000. We pumped 6,000 pounds a minute with all 4 pumps going on. We did 103,000 pounds. I've also dumped 102,000 pounds.
Yeah.
Right after we took off out of Kadena, we lost an engine and
Wow.
had to dump 102,000 pounds just to get down to our landing weight. See, that's the thing, Lee, is
Wow.
people don't understand the just obscene amounts of fuel that we're using in these airplanes, And I remember
Right.
your Black Sea missions. I remember those Black Sea missions because in October, November, and December of 2001, Lee, I was stationed at Incirlik, and you guys were flying those missions out of Ramstein, and maybe you were involved in this, where they had the humanitarian daily rations in the boxes that would spread them out all over. Were you flying those missions? Yeah, and
I did not fly those missions.
I remember, they had to bring in, because we were doing Operation Northern Watch. That's what I was deployed there for. Guard unit, Utah and Tennessee showed up at Incirlik, and that was their sole purpose of being there, was to go up to the Black Sea and refuel the C-17s that were going down into Afghanistan, dropping the humanitarian daily rations, and obviously had a lot of other stuff too.
Right. Right. Yeah, the Tennessee guys and the Birmingham guys were out there fairly often during my Incirlik deployments.
Yeah.
And you'd kind of see them on the regular because they needed to update their carpets.
Yes. I've got one on the wall right here.
Yeah.
For my listeners, you can go into Adana, Turkey, where Incirlik Air Base is. And of course, they have no restrictions on where the Persian carpets come from. And they're just gorgeous, gorgeous carpets. I've got 3 of them, Lee, that I brought home with me in the back of the jet. Because, I'm in the KC-135. We came home with 23 shotguns from the Turkish company Hulu. Yep. Okay. I've got a Browning. I've got a Hulu shotgun, and boy, those were the days, weren't they, man? Go and fly. And
they were.
Go to Mujats. I remember going to Mujats and getting the Adana kebabs. Remember that? For $5, 2 cans of pop.
For $5. And then you needed to get any. Well, I mean, honestly, for Mujats, any of the dishes were good. But obviously, if you weren't messing with somebody at Mujats with the tricks and everything that they had at the table on.
Yeah, I forgot about that.
Making you put your foot in the water and everything else, and messing with you with toothpicks
I forgot about that.
Yeah, that was the Mujats classic, and they'd cut that hole in your sock.
Oh yeah, I forgot about that too. That's right.
Yeah. Well, I guess I take that back. You cut your hole in the sock because you're trying to chop toothpicks with the knife. Yeah. And then they've blindfolded you, and then all of a sudden they end up taking your sock off because they tell you, like, you now need to chop this toothpick off with the sock off in the water, with your foot in the water instead. And you don't realize with your blindfolded, they've stretched your sock out. You just chopped your own sock in half. Classic Mujats.
So my listeners understand, Mujats, it was a famous restaurant everybody went to get Turkish food, unbelievably inexpensive. A really big Adana kebab, about 3 or 4 pieces of flatbread, and 2 cans of Fanta soda pop, and it was like $5, and it was fabulous food. Fabulous food. I always got the kebab.
It was good food.
That's one of the things that everybody always asks me, Lee, about. Well, what's the thing that you remember most about all your travels? The food. Oh, and the chicken tava. That was the other one. The chicken tava was the other one that I loved.
The chicken tava for sure. The chicken tava and the garlic sauce that they would pour on it. Just amazing.
Making me hungry. What's it like doing a max performance climb out in a C-17 at a low gross weight? Because, I mean, you guys have really powerful engines on the C-17.
We did. Each engine put out just a little over 40,000 pounds of thrust. You got 4 of those on an airplane that general operating weight empty, was about 286,000 pounds. You can obviously either fill it up with payload to 190. I never saw it at that level. I've seen it in the 100, just into the low 100,000, but typically a lesser weight because you were trading off for how much gas you could take and the extended range, being able to pump it up and fly for a long time. But when you've already downloaded everything you've got out of Iraq and you're at the tail end of fuel load to get back to Incirlik and you've got all that thrust, I had seen on multiple occasions 35 degrees nose high on bringing that big airplane off the deck. It wouldn't hold it for long, but you could get up there and before you push the nose back over. But it almost felt like, no, not discrediting Fat Albert whatsoever, but if you were going to try and do a Blue Angels Fat Albert impression, it felt like we had the rockets installed and shot away from the deck with that airplane. It was fun, and I'm sure probably to some unnerving that you were pointing that close to the sun when you shouldn't be. But it was certainly impressive. Like I said, of the things that the airplane could do, and especially at lightweight with the capabilities, it was such a fascinating airplane, and to be able to land it on a dirt strip, and then I was fortunate enough to land it Antarctica and land it on the ice runway down there. Just to be able to do all of what it can do, it is impressive. It was just amazing to see how that airplane, whatever you threw at it, it was ready for it. Whatever environment, it was built for everything. It could do it. A funny story about the Antarctica side note that I think I told Taz as well is you go to, depending on the cargo load that you've got in the back, you leave Christchurch and you head down toward Antarctica, and you may have enough gas that you can go land there at the runway. I landed at the Pegasus Runway, and I believe they've got a newer runway now, but we never actually went to McMurdo proper. That's typically a skinnier ice shelf that the LC-130s would go to from the New York Guard. But we would land further out, and it was called Pegasus because there was an old Constellation that was buried in the snow out there. That was the call sign of that airplane. It was the Pegasus. Should be still out there. Our first mission, and you had to go fly one, and then you had to observe one. You needed 2 flights to get checked out for the ice mission. Headed down there, for us, our cargo load was enough where we could only make it 4 hours of the flight before we had to decide from our re-release point, we either needed to turn around and go back to Christchurch, or we were committed. If weather changed, and the weather in Antarctica is so volatile it can change in a second. It can go from winds calm to winds 60 knots to zero visibility in a heartbeat. You had one last minute to call back on an Iridium phone to say, what's the weather look like? And figure out if you're going to be committed or not. We check in, weather was good, and we pressed on. And as I checked in with McMurdo, the voice was really familiar. And I'm like, well, clearly I've never been to Antarctica before. This doesn't make any sense. Just chatting with the guy, just normal calls, it finally resonated a little bit. And I said, is that you? And he's like, yeah. Walt was one of the Bagram air traffic controllers for about 6-8 years or so. It was just a constant voice. If you flew over Afghanistan, you talked to the one guy and you talked to Walt. And I remember asking Walt, I was like, are you avoiding an ex-wife or taxes? Like, how are you picking Afghanistan and Antarctica as your places of employment? You have picked the most austere locations on this planet to find work. And he just laughed. He never told me the answer, but it always cracked me up that here it was, just small world, and yet something that you've heard for years of your life, and all of a sudden is at a completely different spot on the planet.
Isn't that crazy how you recognize that voice?
Yeah.
And when you heard it,
it's it's almost like the aircraft voice.
Yeah. And you're like going, wait a minute, I know this person. And I've been in the air, when I've heard other people's voices too. Being at Kadena, that was one of the constant things at Kadena. I knew Taz's voice. So whenever he came up to the tanker, I knew it was Taz. That's one of the great things about, you were talking about relationships and trust is we had a wing commander when we combined as a wing. He says, I want you to hear a voice on the radio and know who it is. I want you all flying in each other's squadrons. I want the tanker guys flying with the F-15 guys, the F-15 guys flying with the AWACS guys, the AWACS guys flying on the helicopter and everything. We got to learn how we all do business. And from that, it was crazy. I would recognize guys from the 44th Squadron, the 12th Squadron, the 67th Squadron, the AWACS Squadron. It was just crazy. Again, and it built an incredible relationship of trust because you knew who was on the other side of that voice. You knew that it was Rotor Schroeder, the 12th Squadron commander, when you heard his voice, because he had kind of a raspy voice. That's one of the things that I remember about hearing voices again pull up beside us. And I go, okay, that's Haas, Taz, Weeby, and Cruiser, in the 4-ship today. You recognize the voices. Right. You're so busy with them. Tell everybody.
No, and like you were saying, of the five senses, that's, again, of the things that resonate when you're flying. You hear a voice, and not to beat the dead horse, but like you immediately knew what level of experience you were dealing with. That resonated. You knew what you were. Yeah.
The person that you're dealing with, Hey, tell everybody how you go about getting certified to land on the ice in Antarctica, because I know that's a whole process too. I mean, to get picked for the ice. And the other thing too, did you guys have to put the skis on the C-17?
Did not put the skis on the C-17. Landed on the wheels. The runway, the old Pegasus runway was about 100 feet of ice. It was that thick, so the weight bearing capacity was there in spades to support the C-17 landing on it. The crazy piece of it from landing on it is, as you would compare it to, we use runway condition codes, and I know that's a lost art on a lot of other airplanes, to include the ones in the airlines. But we would put in that the code 23 was a dry runway, 12 was a wet runway, and 5 was a nice runway. The code to land down on 100 feet of ice, you would think would be close to landing on ice. And in fact, it wasn't. It was an 11. It was basically the equivalent of just landing on a wet runway. And so the braking action and staying on center line down the runway, relatively normal. It really wasn't that difficult of a landing. Like I said, unless wind conditions or visibility to make a sportier landing, the runway itself was fine. The ramp, however, was not. The ramp was a crash course in how slow can I go and still move the airplane and stop sliding. And that was somewhere around 2 knots. At times you felt like the brakes didn't work and you're sliding at 2 knots on the ramp, and you're like, why? Because you just turned the nose wheel ever so slightly and it got into a rut and grabbed or whatever else. The ramp was atrocious, but the runway was as normal as could be. But it was definitely a crash course in taxiing. I want to say the runway was right around 11,000 feet, I think. So, it was fairly long of a runway because it was ice. All they had to do is just go groom out. It wasn't like they had to pave anything. They just went out with trucks and groomed it. They were like, here's your runway today. So for the most part, it was, while it took maintenance because the conditions could change in Antarctica on what blew over top of it and everything else. But for the most part, it was, fairly easy to construct, I guess.
Did they have any kind of instrument approaches or anything that you guys used to get to it? Or did you RNAV, or how did you guys do it?
We had some instrument approaches in place. They also, at one point, I believe, had some MOSs that were there. And I know that it was on the forefront of conversations that they were exploring options with using the IFF and like mode 5 approaches, to use the IFF to have an instrument approach to get down there, just because of the cost of equipment, because you could set up an ILS, but it's going to get blown over because you're where you're at on the map of the Earth and you're basically in the grid system. There's a lot with the RNAV that, that's not necessarily going to work well either. So a lot of counted on visual condition, as well. on what you have. But they did have, some instrument approaches, but it was limited.
See, that'd be an amazing thing to go down there. And I've seen pictures of, I guess, animal life on the runway every once in a while too. It's just a crazy place to go into.
No, we went in and, here it is. You have this like conquering moment that you've touched a seventh continent and logged off something new. This Australian 737 just lands on the same runway you did and brought people. And you're like, oh, well, I guess it's doable by other people as well.
Yeah, I didn't even think of that. I know there's a lot of things going down on McMurdo, going on down there too. You were flying out of McCord at the time?
It was definitely interesting. And we brought back a guy. No, say again.
Were you flying out of McCord at the time when you were going down there?
Yes, I was McCord. The ICE mission is based out of McCord, where they're pulling pilots from. Now the actual squadron itself is there out of Christchurch, but they will pick the squadron commander and the pilots to come out of McCord, and it's primarily second assignment instructor pilots that they choose from, just because from that second assignment, you'll have enough time through the seasons to go get upgraded to be an ICE IP as well. So with the longevity of first assignment guys, by the time you've actually jumped through all the hoops, you're PCSing and you're going on to some other station. There's no time and longevity that they're going to get out of you. So you typically need to be a second assignment guy there at Cord. But yeah, truly a fun mission. I only got to do the 2 landings my time, but feel blessed to have been able to go do that.
So what kind of cargo were you taking down there? My listeners are probably wondering, what in the world would you have to take to Antarctica? Of course, it needs everything flown in, from milk, butter, bacon to everything else. But I'm sure that there's, what do they call them? Requirements channels or missions or something like that you just typical stuff you bring down there.
So depending on the seasons and obviously, for the listeners as well, but, one thing that I had to wrap my brain around is Southern Hemisphere. Their winter is our summer and vice versa. And so while we would leave in the beginning of wind fly season would be in August, typically, that's their winter, and that's still volatile down there and it's dark. So if you were part of Windfly, you did those approaches with night vision goggles because it was dark. As you did more in the main season in October, November, you had more benign conditions to work with, and you would move most of the requirements for the National Science Foundation about that time frame. However, there may be something that they would request a later season to go down. And so you may have a February, give or take, of another deployment to go down there in February. And that was a nice time to fly. I flew in the beginning of the first season. There were definitely different pockets to go down there to fly to bring stuff in, because the ship or ships, I believe it was like 1 or 2 ships a year would break through the ice on the icebreaker boats and make it through to McMurdo and do the massive amounts of logistical supplies and food. On our mission, or the first one, we brought in what was almost like a shipping container mover. And so was shoved in the back of the C-17. And so we downloaded it and it helped move stuff that was getting off of the boats. But there are other airdrop guys that would go down there and they could airdrop stuff further in for scientists or whatever that may be doing something that wasn't needed right there at the runway or McMurdo and just off the coast. But we took back a scientist that had broken his ankle just by walking around. It was icy. The winds kicked up to 60 miles an hour, knocked him off his feet, and broke his ankle in the process. And some of that, while it may also be supplies, it was also a lifeline for air evac, if you will, to get folks out of there too.
You said something just a moment ago that you're actually going down there on NVGs. I found that fascinating, because you wouldn't think NVG on an ice runway.
Right. But here you are. It's dark because there's no sun. And you got to see something.
For a couple months.
Right.
Not just during the day, but for a couple months.
Exactly.
I didn't put those two together, flying down there on NVGs. I spent 2 years.
I didn't either. It's one of those things of, you don't think about it. You're like, not only is it, opposite seasons, but, oh, by the way, the periods of darkness, and yet people still need the lifeline, still need the ingress of goods.
Hey, a question for you. How did you become interested in being a pilot? What's your aviation origin story? Is this something you want to do ever since you were a kid like me, or is it something that you grew into? What is it? I mean, you mentioned you're a comm guy. Have you always had some passion for airplanes?
In the simplest of answers, my granddad was in the Air Force for 28 years. He amassed something close to over 11,000 hours. I don't have the specifics anymore, but he flew 15 different types of airplanes. He had a mass majority, I think, had over 5,000 hours in the KC-97, and he flew the C-47, the C-54, C-119, C-131, just kind of all over the place, and he flew everything. And he had one job at Maxwell where he eventually retired that sounded like one of the coolest jobs on the planet. He was a petroleum officer, was his additional duty title, which meant he just got to go check out the gas on any airplane that was out on the ramp to make sure that it was good gas.
Oh.
So he could just go take an airplane up for quality assurance purposes, of course.
Oh, of course. Oh, there's a P-51 on the ramp. Let's go up.
Of course. Well, funny story. He did fly that once, and he said he hated every minute of it. He had to fly the P-51 cross country, and he was so used to having the ability to stretch his legs and go to the bathroom. Yeah. Now cramped space and having to land everywhere he needed to made it such a longer trip.
Yeah, the Mustang does not have a very roomy cockpit. 11,000 hours. That's a lot of hours, man.
A lot of hours. He started as a bombardier on the B-17. Went through pilot training with 51F class, and then was in for 28 years and flew all the way, till the end. Flew when they needed him, and flew probably when they didn't need him. And when I got to high school, it was in the back of my mind of flying and him flying and everything else. I mean, we were right by Maxwell, so seeing the 130s, and I played soccer on the base as a kid. We would leave Prattville and go over to Montgomery and play soccer on the base, either at Maxwell or even Gunter. The planes were always there, a part of it. We'd go to any air show that we could to see Thunderbirds and anybody else come through. It was there, and it made more sense on how to pay for college. It was like, well, go to ROTC. Yeah. And so when I went to ROTC, my vision was 2070. And at the time, you still needed 20/20. And so while I joined Air Force because of it, now I needed to shift focus because I wasn't going to meet it. So when I went to field training that sophomore year to take the basic aptitude test and all the things, I couldn't take it because I didn't have the vision for it. So I didn't. And so then I was like, all right, well, I got to do something new and something different. I played lacrosse at Auburn while I was there. And so I was taking this 2-hour Army Ranger class every spring that was helping me stay in shape. Yeah, because they would run their faces off. Oh, yeah. And so I'm running with lacrosse. I'm running with these Army guys, and I'm doing these field training exercises and everything else, Army guys. That I was like, some of this stuff is pretty cool. And so I started looking at special ops. And so I shadowed a combat controller during my junior summer. I thought that was the way I was going to go, but I was so inundated with things at Auburn. I was a tour guide for the university. I was doing a web page for the admission department. I was the starting lineup announcer for the basketball team for 3 years. I did the women's soccer team announcing for a year, on the lacrosse team for 5 years because I was mechanical engineering. So I stayed through it. And mechanical engineering and that himself and the course load, I was busy. Yeah. And with ROTC and doing Arnold Air Society, all the things that I realized I wasn't getting ready for the combat controller portion of the swim test. I was physically fit and acing almost every other test, but I wasn't prepared for the swim. And I was like, I don't know if I can swim a mile in the time allotted or not. I don't know. And you had to set up a special thing with them to come out. It wasn't like you just said, hey, I want to be a combat controller in the drop. I was like, you know what? I wasn't prepared. I'm going to become a comm guy because I'm doing the web pages for the admissions department and the lacrosse team and everything else. I was like, I like the coding stuff. I'll do comm. And it looked at the time of the manning levels, I was like, I can get out of comm. I can go slide over to whatever else. Yeah. And in a roundabout way, it was comm and then my buddy watching my big screen TV that was like, oh yeah, I've got time to actually make this dream happen because they changed the requirements to 2200 for your vision. And so it opened it up after what I thought the opportunity was gone. So I'm kind of one of those where it was a thought from early on because of my granddad, and it looked like that opportunity was going to slip by because of something I couldn't do, and just kind of stuck with it and was able to make it happen.
Hey, talk for a few moments about a lot of people are hearing in the news that the airlines are just having a hard time with a pilot shortage. If you could spend a few minutes talking to my listeners about, because now that you're flying with United and you understand, what it's like to get into a major airline, all my buddies are telling me we still are way behind where pilots are concerned. We need a lot more.
I caution, I guess, my answer in the fact of, I guess I've been on the side right now of aviation where it doesn't seem like there's the shortage because of this post-COVID hiring wave where people are just coming out of the woodwork to be hired. I went to Atlas. They were able to hire at will because Trans-States was folding and a few other airlines that were having to shutter the doors. They were able to pick who they wanted at the time. And then as that has changed, the big airlines have been able to snatch up pilots from the cargo carriers like Atlas or from just the regionals itself. And seeing military buddies be able to pull chocks out of the Air Force and slide over into any of their carrier of choice for the most part right now has almost seemed like it's been a Oklahoma land grab of homesteading. Of they run out and they throw a flag in you and they go, you're ours. I do see the writing on the wall of the planned growth from the major airlines, and the orders of airplanes need to be filled. And those are going to come from pilots that don't exist yet. And you can see it in their need in United building the Aviate program, Delta partnering with Auburn University, and a lot of their outreach. United just unleashed their military program so that guys on active duty can get the conditional job offer before they're actually off of active duty.
Wow.
I can see it that they're leaning forward in that, and what sounded anecdotal at first of shortage. I think that where it's being felt is probably at the regional level of what was kind of partnered and manned with all the major airlines has now been kind of pulled from at a greater rate than they've ever been pulled from before. And the military, while it can plug some holes here and there, I think that's where the first shortages we're going to see is at the regional level, where we're not developing civilian pilots fast enough to replace what was pulled up. And some people can talk at nauseum with more stats than I can about the level of experience that will then come forward and how many hours that it will take for a pilot to be at what level before they move up. And I think clearly you more than I of who you've had the conversations with, of what we talk about with experience and how you gain experience and how you converse with other pilots. It's one thing to have hours behind the jet of actually doing. It's another of just hangar talk and learning on what I can do in certain situations when those arise. I don't know what that will mean when it's all said and done. Will it be a shortage per se of bodies, or will it be the deficiency or lack of experience of the pilots that we have?
Really good point.
I think that's where the crux will be is, are we going to see that it's the quality? And I don't think that the major airlines are going to accept lesser quality. And so I think that's where you may see the shortage occur, is there aren't pilots to be hired yet. And it's not to say that those pilots are deficient. It's just those pilots haven't been seasoned enough to move up. So it may just take longer. There may be a bottleneck, if you will, on development because the development has been so accelerated to meet the hole that was created and everyone kind of moving up.
A good friend of mine was an instructor here in Utah flying school that was getting people on the road to get their commercial instrument rating or their ATP. And he said, Mark, out of the 20 applicants we have, only about 3 or 4 are actually going to make it to the cockpit, which I found fascinating. I was going to say, you and I have heard this term many times. There are people out there that have no concept of manned flight, and he says, I can confirm that. Okay. Because he's had several that really, really want to fly. And then the first time they ever go up in an airplane, they are just sicker than dogs, or they can't think in 3 dimensions. They can't think fast in 3 dimensions, right. Lee. And he said some of them are dangerous in cars. They don't belong in airplanes. Anyway.
Right.
Yeah.
No, so, I think that, I think there is a testament to the level of training that we have in aviation that given long enough, we can make anyone a proficient pilot. But it is that level of investment of time and money on how long it takes to validate that statement. And sometimes it's not, it's not there.
Yeah. Like I said, this guy was saying, he'll get 20 applicants, and he says he thinks that only out of those 20, maybe 3 will make it to a cockpit in a major airline or anything like that. So good friend of mine's a recruiter at Atlas now. He just retired and now has become a recruiter for Atlas Air. Flew 747s for a long time. Loved it. Bob Melchionda. I don't know if you ever ran across him.
Okay.
When you're at Atlas. How long were you at Atlas?
Name's not familiar. I was there for 2 years.
What'd you fly?
On the triple.
On the triple?
777 there. The home basing was a pretty nice concept because they would fly you to wherever you needed to start your trip out of. And when you ended your trip, they'd fly you back home. So from a commuting aspect, it definitely took the stress off the table as you're making a transition from military life to civilian aviation and trying to figure out how do I get to work. That definitely made it an easier learning curve than trying to pick up the ins and outs of commuting now as a mainline guy for United.
So you started at United flying 777s because that had been your experience?
I started on the 7-3. So after the 777 at Atlas,
got it.
My main things that I was looking for was just more time home. And while I saw the movement and hiring on the 7-3 fleet to be at a greater rate than on the 777 fleet or any of the other fleets.
Yeah.
That I could hold a line faster than just sitting reserve somewhere. DC, because my in-laws lived in DC, my ability to commute from Atlanta to DC and stay there, even if I were on reserve, was far easier. For a line holder and everything else, it's a quick flight. And then I had a crash pad, if you will, already in place. And so that's what I was looking for was, how do I make this jump to schedule life and then still be home for the 3 boys and my wife so that she doesn't lose her mind with trying to take care of the boys, because that was the hard part with Atlas is I'd be gone for anywhere from 12 to 17 days in a row. And, that's toll when you're trying to manage the other side of life.
And those are long flights with Atlas too. You guys are spending a lot of time in the air going from.
Yeah, logged over 15 hours of a single flight. And that never did that in a C-17. Got close, but not in one shot.
That's a long time to be in the air. 15 hours. I have one KC-135 flight that was about 14, and that's a long time to be in the air. So how do you like flying the 7-3s?
The 7-3 has been a good airplane. It is definitely a step back a few times over from the C-17 and the 777. And obviously the roominess of a cockpit and where my luggage goes, but then also just the technology in the airplane. And it does crack me up of the variations that the Guppy has gone through, and yet it's been a fun airplane to fly. I like the domestic ability, and the flight length in of itself is almost kind of the same length of a C-17 local of a 4 to 5 hour flight. It's going to be about the max that you're going to get out of it. So
yeah, I've gotten to fly a mock-up cockpit of the 7-3 when I was at Rockwell with the heads-up guidance system and everything. Man, I couldn't believe that technology, the heads-up guidance system. The HUD for airline pilots. It was, the new modern cockpits, like you say, make it so much easier. I still remember doing paper maps, paper charts and taking them up in the airplane with me, It's funny too, because even though the KC-135 went through the big avionics modification, I still did a paper map because I'd put all kinds of notes in it. My closest alternate is here on this heading at this gas. And a lot of the young guys are like going, hey, we've got all these electronics and iPads and everything like that, and you're still doing this. And I'm going, there's a reason for that. And we had our HF radio go out once when we were just getting ready to come out of the Mediterranean and head across to Lodges. And we had an aircraft commander that had come from C-130s and a relatively new co-pilot just as we were approaching Gibraltar. Of course, I had done my little mental map thing. And I said, guys, south, we're going south. Well, where? Rota, Spain. They're like, what? Where? Rota, Spain. What the heck is it, Rota? And I said, believe me, guys, we're coming up on Memorial Weekend. You are going to love where I'm about to take you. Okay. Anyway, we couldn't get the HF coupler had gone out. So I called, Barcelona. Hey, we need And as we're coming into downwind and
Right.
they see the ocean and the city and this airfield and everything, they're like going, hey, this might actually be a good couple days. You've been there. You know what I'm talking about, you know?
Yeah.
And we come in and we land. And the next day, we got there kind of in the evening. The next day, you know, we're all down at the beach and everything down there in the city and everything. And they're all like, Colonel Hasara, we love you, man. You know, because none of them had ever been to Rota. Tankers don't normally go into Rota. Mildenhall was having its air show, so it was closed. We couldn't go there. And I told everybody,
Okay.
we want to go south. We want to go to Rota. And both pilots looked at me like, where are you taking us? And then when we got down there, like, oh, man, this is so cool.
That's awesome.
And we landed there on a Thursday, Lee. They couldn't get to the park to us because it was a Memorial weekend until the following Tuesday. So we were in Rota for 5 days. Stuck, quote unquote, at Rota for 5 days.
Stuck. Yeah. Stuck. What a hardship tour that was.
Yeah, and for all the listeners, Rota, Spain is right on there. Rota, Spain is right on the Mediterranean, right there at Gibraltar. It's just absolutely gorgeous beaches. The food is fantastic. Oh, and Lee, we landed there during the Ferio season too. The Ferio was going on when we were there too. So all of the beer and everything at the fairs are going on and everything. I mean, you know, I thought a couple of my crew members were going to ask for political asylum. We're going to come home with us after they were treated the way they were in Rota, Spain. What were you going to say?
You probably know that Carnival, obviously a large thing in Rio de Janeiro, Trinidad, Tobago ranks in the top 3. And then Cadiz, Spain is in the top of carnivals in the world. And that is right across from Rota. And we landed one afternoon and the guys there in command post were like, hey, it's Carnival. If you want to do Cadiz. And so we're like, we were unplanned, unprepared, but we just found our way over to Cadiz. And it was like Team Halloween. Yeah. It was raining its face off, and it did not deter any of the 20,000 folks we saw out in costume together. I mean, it was like 10 people in a clip would be dressed together. There were 9 guys that were wearing like these Formula One mechanic jumpsuits, and they were pulling this girl around on the Hot Wheels, and she was the driver, you know, and we're out all night long there in Cadiz, and everyone was like, this is awesome. Rota, it was awesome.
Like I said, none of the crew, what are you talking about? We have no idea where you're taking us. And I said, look, just trust me on this one. Okay. You're going to, and I had never been in there either, but I knew from all my heavy airlift guys, if you're going to be stuck somewhere, get stuck in Rota. Yeah. We got routing down there. And as we're coming into downwind, getting ready to land and everything like that, the pilot and the boom and everybody are like going, oh, this could be a lot of fun. And it was a lot of fun. Hey, I understand that you had a man-pad hit on an engine in your squadron. You know, explain to me real quick about what happened there.
That event, I think, definitely brought a lot of things to the community in general. Obviously, the awareness of the threat, we were already aware how to employ the C-17, and I think numerous other powers that be and smart folks before me can say that there was probably some momentum behind the man-pad hit that helped energize the C-17 weapons school and needing to apply ingress and egress procedures and practices and learning from how we maneuvered in and out of the airfield and how to do that safely. Out of our squadron, Paul Sunstein, Ann Lewick, and Andrew Oyland were on the crew. And as they took off, they took a man-pad hit in the number 2 engine. And for the most part, just of what we gathered of obviously the traumatic event of having an explosion right off the side of the left side of the plane. But it's such a jarring event physically, but mentally as well, because you're trying to react to something that is clearly an emergency in a non-normal way. Yeah. You know, here you are, when you look at the battle damage assessment checklist, it's so vague because it doesn't know what level of battle damage you have and why. It's not like they always happen the same way. And so, you know, trying to run through your decision making and assessment as fast as you have to when you're assessing that you've just had an engine been blown off the pylon. And there was even, if I remember correctly, they even discussed that they almost shut down the wrong engine, but just general pacing and everything else kind of had them slow back down because you're trying to react so quickly to something that happened so violently, so quickly off takeoff, that you've still got to slow yourself back down to make the right decision. So they circled back around and landed at Baghdad. After that, if you can say uneventfully, to the best that you can at that point. But it certainly resonated with us because it lingered. It was the reality that there was a threat, and that it was real, and it wasn't as benign as you try to shove it down into your subconscious of, getting yourself in and out of these other airfields. We were in it. And I think to some degree, you could argue that even that event probably stuck in a lot of the crew force's mind when you went through a tactics brief and you thought, here's how I need to employ this airplane. Here's how I need to get out. And I think to some extent that poured into the C-17 safety board investigation when they were looking at instability and unstable approaches because of how crews were getting in and out of fields when they were perceiving us to be, more reckless or unstable and taking risks that weren't needed. Because I think we had seen a risk. We had it firsthand happen, inside the community, inside the squadron. And I think what happened eventually over time that helped dampen it was in the tactics briefs and everything else, what we identified out of the safety investigation was there was never context. There was never a denominator. We always said X amount of events happen, but they never said out of X flight. It always made like the threat was happening to everyone. They go, hey, this man pad was shot today here at this spot. So you think everyone's getting shot at. There's no denominator on the bottom of it. And so I think having the presence of that threat and that man pad, I think definitely carried over into a mentality throughout the community for a while. I think there was just time, and the time healed all wounds and everything else from experience, that it took a little bit to finally dampen that back out, to step back and go, okay, this is a valid maneuver. This is a valid technique. However, I don't need to employ it. The context is not there that warrants the tactical descent or the ingress the way that it needed to be. But yeah, it was definitely a huge experience. And then what I always find interesting out of that is the younger co-pilot on that crew ended up as the highest active duty C-17 pilot in hours before he retired. He had the most hours out of any active duty C-17 guy that I know. And you would think in hindsight that would probably shake a guy.
Yeah. Yeah. It'd shake any pilot.
And yet I believe he finished over 7,000 hours in the C-17, which, if guys were eclipsing 4 and 5, you were in the high country at that point. But he was always flying, and to get into 7,000 was just amazing.
What an amazing event too, to have something like that. You guys have flares. You have a sensor system on your airplane that's telling you that these things.
It was so quick on takeoff that some of the older procedures, I clearly don't know the new things and everything else, but you typically delayed turning some of the systems on to a certain altitude because you didn't want to pick up a burn pit or anything else and throw flares over top of the airfield as you were taking off or landing. But for it to happen, even as the system is on, like everything's so bang, bang that it was almost
instantaneous
on the airfield inside the wire. And, think that a threat is happening that quickly. Again, just the mental processing speed that has to be pulled out and used in that fight or flight kind of moment. They were a testament to how they handled themselves and how they kind of passed that message on.
That's crazy. Your weapons school was forming about the same time ours was. One of the guys that I worked with at the KAOC was Smokey Robinson.
So Smokey was my squadron commander in the 10th Airlift Squadron.
Absolutely fabulous American.
He is an awesome person. He's an awesome leader. He was always a crew advocate, a crew dog, and yet so cerebral in how he was able to connect what we needed to do as a community. Glad that he's in charge of AATC and teaching future minds.
Smokey would be the guy I want educating people.
Yeah, hands down.
He was at the KAOC, I think it was like the end of 2002 or something like that. It was before the Shock and Awe campaign, if I remember right, where he was one of the airlift planners and everything. So I got to meet him there. There are a handful of leaders, 3 stars, 4 stars, my contemporaries that are now in leadership positions that I'm going, hallelujah, this person is in this position. Smokey's one of them. I hope I see him at ATA, the 9th through the 12th of next month. And I hope Smokey gets there. I'd love to see him again.
You talk to me, and I'm sure there's going to be a smile on his face. So.
I'll tell him. Yeah, I'll mention that. Hey, brother, we've been talking for a long time, man. It's been great to have you on. And, man, I really appreciate your comments on John Boyd and the OODA Loop. That's really good wisdom. You took us to church on that today, brother. I really appreciate that. Thanks.
Yeah, no, thank you. Thanks for having me on. It's one of those things that, like, you sit back and you try to think about things, that you've seen and learned over time. And that one just kind of stuck out. It's like, those are little things that we don't even realize that we're doing and making decisions on, and just interpersonal, relationships in the cockpit. Hopefully that resonates.
Yeah, it sure does. And I'm sure it will with our listeners. Thanks, Lee, for being on the Lessons from the Cockpit show today, brother.
Thanks, Mark. Appreciate it. Take care.
Man, there's a lot of good information in this episode with Lee Hunt, C-17 pilot. Folks, this is the 71st episode of the Lessons from the Cockpit show. We've gone over 21,000 downloads recently. And I really appreciate all of you coming by, downloading these off my website or off of Libsyn, wherever, and listening to them. The Lessons from the Cockpit podcast is sponsored and financed by the book Tanker Pilot, Lessons from the Cockpit, found in all 4 formats on Amazon. Hardback, softback with black and white pictures, Kindle, and Audible. The Kindle and Audible version have an extra file that downloads with the book that has the 32 pictures contained in that file. So please go by and pick up on Amazon a copy of the book Tanker Pilot. We are also sponsored by Wall Pilot, custom aviation art for the walls of your home, office, or hangar. There's 137 ready to print 4, 6, and 8 foot long aircraft profiles of your favorite airplanes on the website, or fill out a survey and we will make your favorite airplane for you with your name, tail number, unit, and even your favorite weapons load on the aircraft. This and previous episodes of the Lessons from the Cockpit podcast are found on my website at markhasara.com. My website is kind of my one-stop shopping for everything. All of my speaking, the podcast, my book, and Wall Pilot can all be linked to from there. Appreciate all of you taking the time to listen. And I look forward to talking to you again next week on the Lessons from the Cockpit show, where I'm going to talk about what's going on in Israel. With the terrorist attack by Hamas, some obvious intelligence failures, a lot of questions that need to be asked on how in the world did this happen in one of the most secure nations in the world, and of course the Israeli response to these terrible attacks. I appreciate all of you coming by, downloading, and listening to the Lessons from the Cockpit show. We'll talk to you again next week.